Next, we have here an interesting topic. So you have China with the growth of their economy, obviously the improvement of many citizens' life, and investing in a lot of businesses. And one of their main investments is investing in the real estate here. And what's interesting, according to BusinessInsider.com, China has at least 65 million empty homes, enough homes to populate the country of France, and it offers a glimpse into the country's massive housing market problem here. So how did that arrive here? Now, one would think that investing in real estate would be a safe bet here, but I think there's a mismatch of the supply and demand here. And what brought this about? Let's take a closer look. What's interesting here that 1/5 of the homes in China are empty. So they're calling it the ghost cities here. Now I don't know if you've seen reports here in 60 Minutes or in YouTube documentaries here. So if you were to go outside, just an hour or two, either from Shanghai or even in Beijing, you'll see, looks like a city, but it's basically empty. There's no people living in it. And how did that came about? Well, ghost towns came about because of assumption of sudden influx of people migrating from rural to urban areas here. And this goes back as early in 2000s, or early 2000s, yeah, right at the millennium. Anyway, so they were expecting millions of people migrating from rural to urban areas, and they overestimated the demand here. So from as high as 1 million people to only just a tenth of that. That's 100,000 people who actually who lived in it in reality. So what happened here is people kept on investing on it, thinking that people would live on it. And what happened here? No one living it or renting it or even using it. So they're just there. I mean, I wouldn't say they're already breaking down in a sense, but it's still a finished product, but no one's using it. That's the concerning part. And what's interesting here, the unoccupied units constitute a significant portions of China's enormous housing market. Imagine if that were to suddenly burst. You can just imagine how it will affect the economy in China. And compare that to the United States, it's twice as big. And you can just imagine it's worth in the sum of $52 trillion here. That's back in 2019. So you can just imagine the value it's being valued now at present day. So question is, what led up to this situation here? So obviously, buildings, investing on buildings or real estate is always a good safe bet if people are actually using it. And typically, when they assume that people would migrate, so obviously it would create a new city economy. I won't say economy. So the issue here is there's the mismatch of the supply and demand for real estate. Since Sun, a senior lecturer in Chinese and East Asian business at King's College London, goes on to say, these homes being empty means that they are sold out to investors and buyers, but not occupied by either the owners or renters. So no one's using it, so it would depreciate nonetheless. That's why it looks weird. It's kind of, I don't know what will happen to this one if things were to proliferate and continue in the next few years or decades. I mean, will the bubble burst eventually, which is kind of concerning? But what's interesting here is the government gets big sales from those revenue from leasing out land, and obviously from developers developing it so that they could sell it and generate revenue. Now, this gives the government a very strong incentive to encourage development rather than limiting it, especially if you have limited space here. You want to manage so that the cost of property will be at a manageable space or pace, compared that, let's say, in Hong Kong or even in Singapore, where land is at a premiums. Obviously, if you build property on it, it's going to be at a premium price and you have to pay a hefty fee. Now, creating this has created a lot of unintended consequences, so to speak, and problems here. And obviously, the government promoting development, driving up more and more supplies. But if there's no demand, then there's a big gap there. That's what's happening right now. And obviously, it's not a perfect system, and there are flaws with regards to their urbanization strategy here. And obviously, it's causing more problem than necessary. And question is, what would happen with this in the future? What if no one were to actually utilize those investments? Then if it depreciates or become no value at a certain point, so what happens then? Obviously, the companies, those who develop it, are in debt. And then how would it reflect in the balance sheet here in those companies here? So it would be interesting to see how it pans out here. And obviously, according to Mr. Is it Gan? Mr. Gan or Miss Gan? I'm not sure. Anyway, he mentions that part of the problem is that China's overestimation of its urbanization, which is, yeah, kind of makes sense. And how many people would actually move from rural to urban now? Obviously, that makes sense for majority, but not all are willing. Especially in China, there's even a lot more people living in rural areas than in cities here.